Hello everyone. We finally finished going through Book of Genesis. Now we are going on to Book of Exodus. Book of Exodus is a popular book. You've seen Disney or Pixar, I forget which company, but they made Prince of Egypt. I know it's kind of getting old. It's an old movie now. But certainly there are elements that makes Book of Exodus a very popular story to be retold to even non-Christians. At any rate, Book of Exodus is taking place when Joseph had brought Jacob and all of his family into land of Egypt during the story of famine. Remember that? So here, they have been here for about 200 years or so, and they're maturing and they're growing, and there's just so many of them, and they're growing. And they're about to turn into another nation. They're encroaching the size to become a small nation. And the question is this: are they really a covenant people? If I were to use a New Testament language, are they really a disciple? What are the distinctives about these Israelites living in land of Egypt? Are they going to grow and mature into another nation, just like Egypt or any other surrounding countries? Will they go after the things that other nations are interested in? Will they grow to become identical and similar to the people around them? And certainly that's a question that we can ask for ourselves in the context of discipleship. What are my distinctives on campus? Am I not like everybody else in some ways? I go to class, I eat lunch, and I study, and I watch the same thing that everyone else does. I study the same subject, and there's nothing that I do that is distinctive. And certainly if you're in the workforce, in your corporation, in your business, or wherever you might be working in, that's the question that you have about yourself, I'm sure. How am I a Christian in this place? Well, certainly, as Israelites are growing, Egyptians look at them and they see them as a threat. They're a threat because they're growing large in size and they're becoming another nation within a nation, and they find that disconcerting. Now, they're saying that they're going to become a multitude, and that word itself is sort of a negative word. It's often used with like insects and locusts, like the multiplying of locusts. So then, as a reader, you begin to question, is Israelites going to become insects, cockroaches, locusts, army of locusts that just descend upon earth to consume whatever it is on their way? Or will they become stars in the sky? That is the question. There are two things that I notice here in answering this question. One is that Lord hears people's cry. And two, the Lord himself is incredibly patient and kind. Now, the first thing that God does is that he hears the cries of people, because as Israelites grow, Egyptians begin to persecute them. Now, the first thing that they do is, well, maybe you can get rid of their male infants, drown them in the river, and get rid of them that way. And another thing that we can do is perhaps put them into a forced labor and control their population in that way. And as they are being persecuted and being executed, they begin to cry out to the Lord, and the Lord hears their cries. Now, when God meets Moses in the desert, that's the first thing he says. Look, I've heard the cries of my people, and I want to basically rescue them. You see, as we grow into a disciple of Christ, it doesn't really happen in a classroom. Yes, in ways we have to come and we have to learn and we have to share and we have to dialogue. But there is an element in which you have to cry out to the Lord. God doesn't just barge in and say, look, Egyptians are persecuting you. Can I help? Can I assist you? What are your needs? What are some of the difficulties and complaints that you have, and how can I make your life a little bit better? He doesn't do that, because he doesn't barge into people's lives and people's souls. He waits for them to call upon him and turn to him. And when Israelites cried out, the Lord heard and remembered, and he begins to act upon and respond to their cries. What is something that you are crying about to God? And by crying out, I mean you recognize that this sin inside of you, these difficulties and trials and external forces that are work against you, or relational difficulties, as we have seen so many times in Book of Genesis. Do you cry out to the Lord in the sense of, there's nothing I can do. I need your guidance. I need you to be a shepherd. I need you to be a God who is consistent and rescue me. I need you, God, to be God of Moses, God of Israel. Save me from my misery. I cannot help myself. You're the only one who can bless me, who can take me out of this. Often we don't cry out to God. And that's really what I find about myself. At best, at most, maybe I whine and I complain and I throw a tantrum. But that's just really not the same thing as crying out to the Lord and saying, do something, because you're the only one who can rescue from me from my sins. So, turning into a disciple and possessing distinctives in the world comes when we cry out to the Lord, and that we're not just mere imitators and blenders, and we don't blend into our culture and the life around us. We must cry out to the Lord. Second thing that the Lord does is that he is incredibly patient. And let me tell you why. Right off the bat of book of Exodus, in chapter 2, you see that Moses is the one who is chosen. Like, anybody can tell. Anybody with quarter of a brain can tell that Moses is a special chosen one to do something about the misery of Israelites living in Egypt. Now, Moses lives, he is a Hebrew baby, and there's a royal edict dictating that you must drown your male-born baby in the Nile River. But his mother, Jochebed, she makes a basket, and to make the long story short, she waterproofs the basket, puts the baby inside, and she drifts the baby down the river. And his sister, so Moses' sister, who did not have to be executed because she's a female, is watching baby Moses flowing down the river. And there, Moses gets rescued by none other than Pharaoh's own daughter. And he lives his life. Imagine that. Imagine the irony of this story. He lives his life in the palace of the person that is persecuting his own people. He lives as an Egyptian man, an Egyptian prince of Egypt, just like the movie, for 40 years. And one day he goes out, assuming on his nice chariot, and he sees an Egyptian man hitting a Hebrew man. Moses looks around and noticed that nobody was watching, so he kills the Egyptian man. Now, the following day, Moses goes out again, and he sees two Hebrew men fighting each other. And he approaches them, assuming that because he identifies, a big part of himself, he identifies as a Hebrew. But in his effort to stop two Hebrew men from fighting, the response he got from them was shocking. He said, who made you a ruler over us? If we don't listen to you, are you going to kill us just like you did to the Egyptian man? And Moses was in shock. And he soon found out the Pharaoh knew. And Pharaoh was after Moses to execute him for killing an Egyptian man without a cause. Moses puts himself in a self-exile, and he goes into the desert, and he lives there. Now, these two short stories I've told you Moses was 40 years old when he killed an Egyptian man, and from that point he puts himself into self-exile, and he lives in the desert for another 40 years. 80 years. Remember the story of Jacob? I just finished the Life Devo. Today's Friday night. I just finished the Friday night Life Devo session. And it took Joseph right to the end of chapter 48, right to the last moment, for him to truly, truly change and call upon God. Now, it took Moses 80 years to get rid of the following. One, his own personal pride. He thought he can be the rescuer and redeemer because he's ethnically Jew and culturally and perhaps and financially and status-wise Egyptian prince. And notice a lot of men in the Bible in Genesis and Exodus, they possess incredible amount of physical prowess, just like Jacob before him. Moses struck a man and he killed. He had incredible physical prowess, and he had all this preconceived notion of who he is about himself. It took God 40 years to watch Moses grow up into a self-important, self-reliant person. And God watched Moses for another 40 years in the desert, watching him get rid of all of those connections that he had and make Egyptian connections and self-importance connection. And now Moses was able to connect with being a shepherd in the desert. Just like his forefathers before him, he was becoming like them. In a way, he's making himself into nothing. Or God is putting him into a situation where he is becoming really nobody. And that he's getting rid of all the earthly glories and power and wealth so they can identify with himself as no one. God does not need super Christians. Being a disciple of Christ does not mean your earthly success. But it means that you have to let go of the things that makes you similar to the dominant culture around you. The identity, habits, the clothes, lifestyle, everything that you have that makes you look like an Egyptian, that makes you look like a secular person, you need to address that. And this doesn't happen, guys, in a classroom. And this doesn't really happen overnight either. It takes a lot of time. If you met the Lord at the age of 12, it will take at least 12 years. It's not in the Bible, but just rule of thumb, I'm sharing with you. And if you've been backsliding for a while, it will take you just as long to get rid of the habits, behaviors, thoughts, and all the connections that you have made that makes you similar to a secular world. Christ, though he was sinless in himself, just like Moses, made himself nothing. He became nobody. And God, just like God called Moses when he was nobody through the burning bush, God called Jesus, who was not, who had no beauty or majesty to attract us to him. And that he wasn't born in a palace like Moses, or he wasn't raised in a palace. That he didn't live in a pomp and wealth and influence and political power. But he came as no one, putting all of his trust in God and God alone. And that is our Savior. That if our Lord and Redeemer lived a life where he emptied himself to become nothing for us, so that he may identify with us as who we are, a true human being, taking on the flesh, then should we not welcome the long process of discipleship and what we call sanctification, the burning process of purifying our heart and our lives and our behavior? Now, I have a question for you that I posed in the beginning. Israelites are growing into a multitude. And that word multitude, multiplying, it is like a swarm of flies or locusts. Is Israelite going to grow and just hatch out of their eggs and just multiply and become a pestilence? Or will they become the Milky Way? And that is the question that we can ask ourselves today. As you grow older, as you multiply your wealth, multiply your knowledge, multiply your family, and multiply the number of bathrooms in your living place. And as your bank account grow bigger and bigger, what is all that really becoming? Are you multiplying to become somebody that will disadvantage others? Or are you becoming someone that will be a blessing to those around you? What do you cry out? What do you cry out about today? Where is your true discomfort? What breaks your heart today? Does the things that you multiply, do they bring a lot of pleasure to you? Then I dare say that you might need and you might want to pray, Lord, take me into the desert. Allow me to lose all of these things that I cherish. Bring me on my knees. Get me to take off my sandals before you and serve you alone. In short, we need a lot of mini Moseses in our world today. Someone who has gone through a long period of desert. Someone who is comfortable in suffering and experienced the guidance of God. You know, if you ever lost a job, or you went through sickness, or some sort of relational strife, and you went through your desert, maybe if you cry out in the right way, if you cry out about the right thing, then you can take on the ministry that Moses has taken on. I'm not talking about, well, I lost a job and you lost a job. Don't worry, everything turned out okay for me and God will turn out everything okay for you. Not that kind of ministry where you just simply say God will take care of everything and everything will be okay. What I mean by mini Moses is this. When I lost my job, these were the doubts, sins, and struggles and resistance that I faced. Just like Moses, when God called me and said, look, I need you to take my people out of the land of Egypt. And what did Moses say? I don't want to. Who are you? And do you know me? I'm slow of speech. And if you ever gone through a trial in your life, and you can identify your doubts, your struggle and resistance against God, and you have testimony of how God got you out of those things, then I think you can be a mini Moses, leading other people out of their own cries. That you're not just growing, maturing, and multiplying into pestilence or into the similar image of people around you, but that you're growing to become someone who can take people from one side of the Red Sea onto the other side. I encourage everyone, don't waste your exile. Don't waste your time of your suffering. Surrender to the Lord, and I pray that He will make you one of the stars in the sky that will be a blessing to others.